You're either with us or you're against us, Nolan. Those words still echo in my mind. 2 weeks. That's all it took for everything to crumble. My name is Nolan Fitzgerald, and what I'm about to tell you will change how you think about corporate loyalty forever. But before we dive into this incredible story, if you enjoy content about standing up for what's right and the power of integrity in the workplace, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. It really helps us bring you more inspiring stories like this one. I'm 47 years old, and I've been crunching numbers longer than most people have been alive. For the past 11 years, I called Meridian Analytics my professional, mid-sized data consulting firm nestled in the heart of Austin, Texas. Started there as a junior data analyst fresh out of graduate school, worked my way up through sheer determination and an obsession with accuracy that bordered on the neurotic. By the time this story begins, I held the title of Senior Financial Data Specialist. Sounds fancy, right? What it really meant was that I was the guy who made sure our client reports were bulletproof. Every graph, every projection, every recommendation that went out the door had my fingerprints on it. I knew our client portfolios better than I knew my own bank account, and that's saying something because I checked that religiously every morning with my coffee. That Tuesday morning in September, sitting across from my boss, Donovan Kraus, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Not literally. Of course, this is Texas, not California, but something fundamental changed in that sterile conference room with its motivational posters about synergy and thinking outside the box. Donovan had called me in for what he described as a strategic alignment discussion. Red flag number 1. In corporate speak, strategic alignment usually means someone's about to get screwed, and they want to make it sound like a business opportunity. He leaned forward across the glass table, his perfectly pressed shirt and $1,000 watch catching the harsh fluorescent light. The corner office, with its panoramic view of Lady Bird Lake, suddenly felt like a cage. His words hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. For 3 months, he'd been dropping hints. Subtle at first, suggesting we might want to optimize certain client projections, or wondering if we were being too conservative with our market analysis. The hints had grown less subtle over time, culminating in this moment where subtlety died a violent death. The Pinnacle Industries account, he said, sliding a thick folder across the table. They're expecting 18% growth projections for Q4. I need you to make the numbers work. I opened the folder, stared at the data, closed it again. Donovan, I said carefully, their actual performance suggests 6% growth at best, maybe 8%, if market conditions improve dramatically. He smiled, the kind of smile a shark gives a seal. That's why they pay us to be creative, Nolan. Let me paint you a picture of who I was before this whole mess started. Nolan Fitzgerald, 47, divorced father of 2 teenage kids, Emma, 16, and Jake, 14. My ex-wife, Rebecca, lived in Houston with her new husband, and I got the kids every other weekend and most school holidays. Not ideal, but we made it work. I owned a modest 3-bedroom house in South Austin, drove a reliable Honda Civic that was old enough to vote, and had exactly 73, 0 in my 401 EC. Not wealthy by any stretch, but comfortable, stable, the kind of middle-class existence that politicians love to talk about during election season. At Meridian Analytics, I was known for 3 things: my obsessive attention to detail, my inability to let errors slide, and my legendary hatred of office birthday parties. Seriously, I'd rather calculate compound interest by hand than pretend to care about Carol from HR turning 52. But here's what mattered most. I had a reputation. 11 years of spotless work. Never missed a deadline. Never submitted a report with errors. Never had a client complaint about my analysis. In the data world, that's like being a baseball player with a perfect batting average. It just doesn't happen unless you're absolutely obsessed with getting things right. Donovan knew this about me. He'd hired me himself 8 years earlier when he was promoted from senior project manager to department head. We had a good working relationship, professional, efficient, built on mutual respect. He trusted my work. I delivered results that made him look good to the executives upstairs. That's what made this morning so jarring. The Donovan sitting across from me wasn't the same guy who'd recommended me for my last promotion. This version had different eyes, hungrier eyes, desperate eyes. Creative, I repeated, feeling like I was speaking a foreign language. Donovan, the data is the data. Their Q3 performance was 3% below projections. Their supply chain costs are up 12% year over year. Their primary market segment is contracting, not expanding. He interrupted me with a wave of his hand. Those are just variables, Nolan. We're analysts. We analyze. We find patterns others miss. We identify growth opportunities that don't show up in raw numbers. I stared at him. This was corporate doublespeak at its finest, taking words like analyze and patterns and twisting them until they meant their exact opposite. What you're describing isn't analysis, I said slowly. It's fiction. The smile vanished from his face. It's business, Nolan. And business sometimes requires optimism. Optimism is hoping for the best while preparing for the worst. This is just lying. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Outside, I could hear the distant hum of Austin traffic and the faint sound of construction from the new high-rise going up across the street. Normal sounds from a normal world where people didn't ask you to falsify data reports on a Tuesday morning. I'm going to pretend you didn't say that, Donovan said finally. Take the afternoon to think about it. We'll talk tomorrow. The thing about corporate pressure is that it rarely arrives all at once. It seeps in gradually, like water through a cracked foundation. Looking back, I can trace the timeline perfectly. It started in June with seemingly innocent comments during our weekly team meetings. The market research division at Henderson Associates is really aggressive with their projections, Donovan mentioned casually while reviewing our quarterly performance. They're showing 22% growth estimates for the tech sector while we're sitting at 14%. Makes us look conservative. At the time, I thought he was just making conversation. Industry gossip. Every consulting firm keeps tabs on their competitors. But these comments kept coming, week after week, always with the same underlying message. We weren't being aggressive enough. By July, the hints became more direct. The Steinberg Group account, he'd say, reviewing my monthly report. They're paying us premium rates for premium insights. Are we really giving them premium value with these modest projections? I'd explain my methodology, show him the data sources, walk him through the analytical framework I'd used for the past 8 years without a single client complaint. He'd nod, thank me for the thorough explanation, and then ask the same questions the following week. August brought the first explicit request to adjust my analysis. The Clearwater Properties account wanted expansion recommendations for the Dallas market. My research showed minimal growth potential, too much existing inventory, declining population in their target demographic, increased competition from established players. What if we focused on different metrics? Donovan suggested during our review meeting. Maybe emphasize the long-term demographic trends rather than current market conditions. The long-term trends support the same conclusion, I replied. Dallas residential real estate is oversaturated in their price range. But what about the Austin spillover effect? People priced out of Austin moving to Dallas. I pulled up the migration data. The numbers don't support that theory. Most Austin immigrants are moving to smaller cities, not Dallas. He leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers on the desk. Nolan, I need you to be more flexible in your thinking. We're consultants, not accountants. Our job is to find opportunities, not obstacles. That's when I knew we had a problem. In the data analysis world, there's no difference between consultants and accountants when it comes to accuracy. Numbers don't lie, and they don't care about your business development goals. The pressure intensified in September. Donovan started scheduling more frequent one-on-one meetings. He'd bring up specific clients, specific reports, always suggesting small modifications that would make our projections more optimistic. The restaurant chain analysis for Morrison Foods, he'd say. What if we assumed a 5% increase in consumer dining spending instead of the 2% you projected? Because consumer dining spending has been flat for 18 months, I'd respond. A 5% increase would require a fundamental shift in consumer behavior that we have no reason to expect. But if it happened, it would significantly improve their expansion prospects. And if aliens landed tomorrow, it would significantly impact the aerospace industry. We base projections on probable outcomes, not wishful thinking. These conversations always ended the same way, with Donovan looking frustrated and me feeling like I was speaking a different language. By the third week of September, I realized he wasn't asking for my professional opinion anymore. He was testing my willingness to compromise my standards. The morning he slid that Pinnacle Industries folder across the table, I finally understood what had been happening. This wasn't about methodology or market analysis or professional differences of opinion. This was about whether I was willing to lie for money. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of false cheerfulness that only Texas weather can provide. Bright sunshine, temperatures in the mid-70s, The kind of day that makes you forget it's still technically summer and reminds you why people moved to Austin in the first place. I spent Tuesday night reviewing the Pinnacle Industries file 3 times: spreadsheets, market analyses, quarterly reports, competitor assessments, every angle I could think of, every methodology I'd learned in graduate school, every trick I'd picked up in 11 years of professional analysis. The conclusion was the same every time: 6% growth, maybe 8% with optimal conditions. Pinnacle Industries was a solid company with decent fundamentals, but they were operating in a mature market with established competitors and rising input costs. Projecting 18% growth wasn't optimistic, it was delusional. Donovan was waiting for me when I arrived at the office. Not in his corner office, but standing by my cubicle with 2 cups of coffee and what I'm sure he thought was a winning smile. "Morning, Nolan. Beautiful day, isn't it?" I accepted the coffee cautiously. In corporate culture, unexpected gestures of friendliness usually precede requests for professional suicide. "It is," I agreed. "Clear skies, good visibility. Perfect weather for seeing things as they really are." His smile flickered slightly. "About yesterday's discussion?" "You mean about falsifying the Pinnacle Industries projections?" "About finding creative solutions to complex analytical challenges." The smile was back, but it looked strained now. "I've been thinking about our conversation, and I believe there might be some middle ground we haven't explored." I sipped my coffee. It was good coffee, the expensive stuff from the local roaster, not the office swill. Definitely a softening up tactic. "What kind of middle ground?" "Well, your analysis focused primarily on historical performance and current market conditions. But what about emerging trends, disruptive technologies, paradigm shifts that might not show up in traditional datasets?" I stared at him. "Donovan, they manufacture industrial cleaning supplies. The most disruptive technology in their sector is probably a new type of mop. But what about the sustainability trend? Green cleaning products? Corporate environmental initiatives? Those markets are exploding. Pinnacle's product line is 87% traditional chemical cleaners. They'd need to completely restructure their manufacturing, retrain their workforce, and rebuild their supply chain to pivot to green products. That's not a Q4 growth opportunity, that's a 5-year strategic overhaul." The smile finally died. "Nolan, I'm going to be very direct with you. The senior partners are putting pressure on all department heads to increase revenue. My job performance is being evaluated based on client satisfaction and retention. Happy clients are clients who see growth opportunities in their market analysis. And unhappy clients are clients who make business decisions based on false information and lose money. Unhappy clients are clients who take their business to competitors who understand the value of optimism." There it was. The moment of truth, stripped of corporate euphemisms and diplomatic language. He wasn't asking me to be creative or flexible or optimistic. He was asking me to lie because lying was more profitable than telling the truth. I thought about my mortgage payment, my kids' college funds, my 401k that had finally recovered from the last market crash, Rebecca's occasional comments about how I needed to be more ambitious if I wanted to provide better support for Emma and Jake. Then I thought about every client who trusted Meridian Analytics to give them accurate information, every business owner who'd made major financial decisions based on reports I'd written, every employee at those companies whose livelihood depended on their executives making smart choices based on reliable data. "I can't do it, Donovan," I said quietly. "I won't falsify projections for any client, regardless of what they want to hear." His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, disappointment, anger, and finally, cold calculation. "I see," he said. "Well, I suppose that clarifies where you stand." He turned and walked back to his office, leaving me with a bad feeling and an excellent cup of coffee I no longer wanted to drink. The demotion came exactly 4 hours and 23 minutes later. I know the timing precisely because I was watching the clock, waiting for the other shoe to drop. In my experience, when you refuse a direct order from your boss in corporate America, consequences arrive with the punctuality of a German train schedule. The messenger was Yolanda Martinez, our human resources director. She appeared at my cubicle at 2:23 p.m. with a manila folder and the kind of professionally sympathetic expression they probably teach in HR certification classes. "Nolan, could I speak with you privately?" We walked to conference room B, the smaller one without windows that management used for uncomfortable conversations. She closed the door, opened her folder, and got straight to business. "We're implementing some organizational restructuring," she began, using the corporate equivalent of "we need to talk" in a relationship. Your role is being redefined. I nodded. Let me guess. I'm being demoted. Reassigned, she corrected, to Junior Data Analyst, reporting to Cassandra Williams in the Market Research Division. Junior Data Analyst, the same position I'd held 11 years ago when I started at Meridian. A 35% pay cut, loss of my senior-level responsibilities, and the professional humiliation of reporting to someone who'd been in diapers when I was earning my master's degree. Effective when? I asked. Immediately. Your new supervisor is expecting you at 3:00 p.m. for orientation. I almost laughed. Orientation. As if I needed someone to explain how data analysis worked after doing it for over a decade. Any particular reason for this sudden restructuring? Yolanda's expression became even more professionally neutral. Management has identified some concerns about your adaptability to evolving client needs. Adaptability. Yes, the ability to provide flexible solutions that align with client expectations. There it was again, corporate doublespeak for willingness to lie when lying is profitable. I wondered if they taught specific euphemisms for ethical flexibility in business school, or if managers just developed their own creative vocabulary over time. I understand, I said. Where will I be sitting? Cubicle 47, near the printer station. Of course, the Siberia of office real estate, where they put people they want to forget about. Close enough to the office noise and foot traffic to make concentration difficult, far enough from the management offices to minimize accidental face-to-face interactions. I gathered my personal items photos of Emma and Jake, my University of Texas coffee mug, a small cactus plant that had somehow survived 3 years of office air conditioning, and packed them into a cardboard box from the supply closet. 11 years of professional achievement reduced to items that fit in a container originally designed for printer paper. The walk to Cubicle 47 felt like a funeral procession. My former colleagues, people I'd worked with, mentored, shared countless coffee breaks and project deadlines with, suddenly found their computer screens fascinating when I passed their desks. Word travels fast in an office environment, especially bad news. Cassandra Williams was waiting for me, 28 years old, MBA from Northwestern, 2 years of experience, and the kind of eager ambition that reminded me uncomfortably of my younger self. She seemed genuinely embarrassed by the situation. Mr. Fitzgerald, she said, extending her hand. I want you to know this wasn't my idea. I appreciate that, Cassandra. And please call me Nolan. I've reviewed your work history, your reputation. This is, well, it's awkward. I liked her already. Anyone willing to acknowledge the obvious absurdity of the situation had at least some integrity. Let's just focus on the work, I said. What do you need me to start with? She handed me a stack of files, basic market surveys, entry-level analysis tasks, the kind of work I could complete in my sleep. It was busy work designed to keep me occupied while management figured out their next move. As I settled into my new cubicle, I could see Donovan's corner office through the maze of workstations. The lights were on, and I could make out his silhouette through the frosted glass, pacing back and forth while talking on the phone, probably explaining to someone why his star analyst had suddenly become a problem employee. What he didn't realize was that demoting me hadn't solved his problem. It had just given me time to think. Cubicle 47 turned out to be a blessing in disguise, though I didn't realize it at first. Tucked away in the back corner of the office, next to the perpetually malfunctioning printer and the water cooler that dispensed lukewarm liquid of questionable origin, it was the kind of workspace management assigns to people they want to forget about. But isolation has its advantages when you need to think clearly. For the next week, I processed basic market surveys and demographic reports while my mind worked on the bigger picture. The thing about being a senior analyst is that you develop a comprehensive understanding of how your company operates. Client relationships, revenue streams, project timelines, financial dependencies, information that seems routine when you're part of the inner circle but becomes critically important when you're suddenly on the outside looking in. During my lunch breaks, I started taking walks around downtown Austin. Not because I particularly enjoyed urban hiking, but because I needed to clear my head and process what I'd learned over the past 11 years at Meridian Analytics. 3 blocks from our office, there was a small park with benches overlooking Town Lake. I'd sit there with a sandwich from the deli across the street and think about patterns, data patterns, behavior patterns, business patterns that I'd been too close to see clearly while I was still part of the machine. The first pattern I identified was financial. Meridian's client base had been shifting over the past 18 months. Traditional long-term contracts were being replaced by shorter-term, higher-fee arrangements. More clients demanding aggressive projections, fewer clients interested in conservative analysis. Revenue per client was up, but client retention was down. The second pattern was personnel. 3 senior analysts had left the company in the past year. All of them experienced professionals with solid reputations. All of them citing philosophical differences with management in their resignation letters. I'd assumed they were pursuing better opportunities elsewhere, but now I wondered if they'd face the same pressure to compromise their professional standards. The third pattern was structural. Donovan had been promoted to department head just as this shift was beginning. His background was in business development, not data analysis. He understood client relationships and revenue generation better than statistical methodology or analytical integrity. From a business perspective, his promotion made perfect sense. From a professional ethics perspective, it was like putting a salesman in charge of a laboratory. By Thursday of my first week in exile, I'd reached an uncomfortable conclusion. What happened to me wasn't personal, and it wasn't unique. It was systematic. Meridian Analytics was transitioning from a consulting firm that prioritized accuracy to one that prioritized client satisfaction, regardless of whether that satisfaction was based on realistic expectations. The Pinnacle Industries report wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a broader strategy to retain clients by telling them what they wanted to hear instead of what they needed to know. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my former colleague, Patricia Vance, who'd left Meridian 6 months earlier for a position at a research firm in Dallas. "Nolan," her voice brightened when she recognized mine. "How are things at the old salt mine?" "Complicated," I said. "Can I ask you something about why you left?" The brightness in her voice dimmed slightly. "What do you want to know? Were you getting pressure to modify your analyses? Make projections more optimistic than the data supported?" Long pause. "Why are you asking?" I told her about the Pinnacle Industries situation, about my demotion, about the patterns I'd been observing. When I finished, she was quiet for almost a minute. "Jesus, Nolan. I was hoping things would improve after I left." "So it wasn't just you?" "No, it wasn't just me. Donovan had meetings with all the senior analysts starting last spring. Individual meetings where he talked about evolving client expectations and competitive positioning. Some people adapted. Others didn't. What happened to the ones who didn't adapt? They found reasons to leave. Better offers, family relocations, career changes. I don't think anyone was actually fired, but the message was clear enough. I thought about the 3 departures I'd noted in my mental analysis. "Patricia, did you document any of this? The pressure to falsify reports?" "Some emails, a few memos." "Why?" "Because I think Meridian is heading for serious trouble, and I think our clients deserve to know what kind of analysis they're actually paying for." Another long pause. "Nolan, be careful. Whatever you're thinking about doing, just be careful." After hanging up, I sat in my living room with a beer and Emma's latest school photos, thinking about consequences. Personal consequences, professional consequences, and the consequences for clients who were making million-dollar business decisions based on artificially inflated projections. By Friday morning, I'd made my decision. Friday morning came with unseasonable rain, the kind of steady drizzle that makes Austin feel more like Seattle and gives everyone an excuse to drive even worse than usual. I arrived at the office early, before most of my colleagues, and spent an hour reviewing the Pinnacle Industries file one more time. The numbers hadn't changed overnight, still showed 6% realistic growth, maybe 8% with optimal conditions. The 18% projection Donovan wanted would require a combination of market expansion, cost reduction, and operational efficiency improvements that bordered on miraculous. At 9:30 a.m., I walked to his corner office and knocked on the doorframe. He looked up from his computer, and I could see the calculation in his eye of surprise that I was there, followed by what looked like hope that I'd changed my mind. "Nolan, come in. Close the door." I sat down in the same chair where this whole mess had started a week earlier. The view of Lady Bird Lake looked different in the rain rare, more subdued, somehow more honest. "I've been thinking about our conversation," I began. "Good. I was hoping you'd see the bigger picture." "Oh, I do see the bigger picture. That's exactly why I'm here." His expression shifted slightly. "What do you mean?" I opened the Pinnacle file and spread the contents across his desk. Market analyses, competitor assessments, quarterly performance data, industry trend reports. This is the data, I said, pointing to the spreadsheets. Real numbers from reliable sources. Pinnacle Industries is a solid company in a mature market. They've got good fundamentals, competent management, and realistic prospects for modest growth. Right, but you want me to tell them they can expect 18% growth, which would require them to somehow triple their market share while reducing costs and expanding into segments where they have no competitive advantage. Donovan leaned back in his chair. Nolan, we've been through this. No, we haven't. We've danced around it with euphemisms and corporate doublespeak, but we haven't actually discussed what you're asking me to do. I pulled out a legal pad and wrote two numbers, 6% and 18%. This, I said, pointing to the first number, is professional analysis based on data and methodology. This, I pointed to the second number, is fiction designed to generate client satisfaction. You're being overly dramatic. Am I? Let's think through the consequences. Pinnacle's executives read our report projecting 18% growth. They make expansion decisions based on that projection. They secure financing, lease additional facilities, hire more staff, increase inventory. Donovan said nothing. Then reality hits. Q4 numbers come in at 6% growth instead of 18%. They're overextended, overleveraged, and facing cash flow problems they weren't prepared for. How do you think that conversation goes when they call us asking why our projections were off by 200%? Market conditions can change. Don't. I held up my hand. Don't insult both our intelligence by pretending this is about market volatility. This is about whether Meridian Analytics provides clients with professional analysis or professional fantasy. The office was quiet except for the sound of rain against the windows and the distant hum of computers. Donovan drummed his fingers on the desk, the same nervous habit I'd noticed during our first conversation about this. Nolan, I'm going to ask you one more time. Will you revise the Pinnacle projections to show 18% growth? No. Will you consider alternative analytical frameworks that might support more optimistic conclusions? If by alternative analytical frameworks you mean making stuff up, then no. His jaw tightened. Will you at least try to be more flexible in your approach? If by flexible you mean willing to compromise professional standards for client satisfaction, then absolutely not. We stared at each other across the desk. Outside, I could hear the sound of colleagues arriving for work, coffee brewing in the break room, the normal sounds of a normal business day in a place where people were expected to do their jobs with integrity. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be, he said finally. No, Donovan. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. I'm doing exactly what you hired me to do 11 years ago, provide accurate analysis based on reliable data. He stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the rain for a long moment. The business environment has changed, Nolan. Client expectations have evolved. We need to evolve with them or get left behind. What you're describing isn't evolution. It's corruption. He turned around, and his expression had hardened. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation. It's an observation. You're asking me to falsify a client report. That's corruption by definition. I'm asking you to be a team player. No, you're asking me to be a co-conspirator. The conversation was over. We both knew it. Monday morning arrived with a summons that felt like a death warrant. Email from Yolanda Martinez. Timestamp 7:42 a.m. Please report to conference room A at 9:00 a.m. for a performance evaluation meeting. This is mandatory. Conference room A was the big one, with the polished table and ergonomic chairs reserved for important meetings. The kind of room where they announced promotions, celebrated major contract wins, and apparently, executed professional careers. I arrived precisely at 9:00 to find three people waiting for me. Yolanda, Donovan, and someone I didn't recognize, a thin man in an expensive suit with the pale complexion of someone who spent more time with legal documents than sunlight. Nolan, please sit down, Yolanda began. This is Richard Steinberg from our legal counsel. Legal counsel. Meridian was a mid-sized consulting firm with maybe 60 employees. We didn't have an internal legal department. We had a law firm on retainer that we called when clients disputed invoices or when someone needed to review a complex contract. Richard Steinberg was external counsel, which meant this meeting had escalated far beyond internal HR issues. Mr. Fitzgerald, Steinberg said, opening a leather portfolio, we need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding your recent conduct. I said nothing. In my experience with lawyers, Silence is usually the safest initial response. Specifically, he continued, allegations have been made that you've been insubordinate, uncooperative, and potentially in violation of your employment agreement. What allegations? Donovan leaned forward. Refusal to complete assigned work, questioning management decisions in front of other employees, making defamatory statements about company practices. And which of those allegations is inaccurate? Steinberg made a note on his legal pad. Are you confirming that you refused to complete assigned work? I'm confirming that I refused to falsify a client report. That's not how management characterizes the situation. I'm sure it isn't. How does management characterize asking an employee to project 18% growth for a company whose actual performance supports 6% growth? Another note. Mr. Fitzgerald, are you recording this conversation? No. Good. Because what we're discussing here involves confidential client information and proprietary analytical methods. I almost smiled. Proprietary analytical methods. That was creative making, falsification of data sound like intellectual property. Yolanda opened her folder. We've prepared a performance improvement plan that addresses the concerns management has raised. She slid a document across the table. I read through it quickly. 90 days to demonstrate improved cooperation with management directives, enhanced flexibility in analytical approaches, and better alignment with client service objectives. And if I don't meet these objectives? Termination for cause, Steinberg said, which would impact your eligibility for unemployment benefits and could affect future employment references. There it was, the stick to go with whatever carrot they thought they were offering. What happens if I refuse to sign this? Then we'll be forced to consider immediate termination based on your recent conduct. I thought about my mortgage, Emma and Jake's college expenses, the health insurance that covered Emma's asthma medication. Then I thought about Patricia Vance and the other colleagues who'd found reasons to leave rather than compromise their professional standards. I need time to consider this. Of course, Yolanda said. You have until Wednesday to decide. As I stood to leave, Steinberg spoke again. Mr. Fitzgerald, I want to be very clear about something. Any discussion of internal company matters with outside parties' clients, competitors, regulatory agencies, media would constitute a serious breach of your confidentiality agreement. Even if those internal matters involve potentially fraudulent practices, his expression didn't change, especially then. I walked back to cubicle 47 with a clearer understanding of my situation. This wasn't just about one falsified report or one difficult client. Meridian Analytics had apparently decided that accommodating client fantasies was more profitable than providing accurate analysis, and they needed employees who would play along without asking uncomfortable questions. The performance improvement plan was really an ultimatum. Compromise your professional standards or find another job. What they didn't realize was that they'd just clarified my decision for me. That afternoon, I used my lunch break to walk to the downtown library and use their computers to research something that had been nagging at me since my conversation with Patricia. If Meridian was systematically providing clients with inflated projections, what was happening to those clients when reality failed to match their expectations? What I found in the business news archives made my stomach turn. 3 companies, all former Meridian clients, all had made major expansion decisions in the past 18 months based on optimistic growth projections. All were now facing serious financial difficulties. Morrison Technologies had opened 2 new facilities based on projections of 20% market growth. Actual growth had been 7%. They'd laid off 150 employees in October. Clearwater Properties had launched their Dallas expansion based on demographic projections that hadn't materialized. They were now facing foreclosure on $15 million worth of commercial real estate. Pinnacle Industries wasn't the first client being asked to believe in impossible growth. It was just the latest. I printed the articles, walked back to the office, and made a decision that would change everything. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with a yellow legal pad, a cup of coffee, and the business articles I'd printed at the library. Emma was at her mother's house. Jake was at soccer practice, and I had the silence I needed to think through the most important decision of my professional life. The evidence was clear. Meridian Analytics had been providing multiple clients with unrealistic projections that led to poor business decisions and significant financial losses. The pattern wasn't accidental, it was systematic, and it wasn't stopping with Pinnacle Industries. I thought about the easy path. Sign the performance improvement plan, keep my head down, falsify whatever reports management requested, keep my job, my health insurance, my steady paycheck. Pretend I didn't know that other companies were making disastrous decisions based on fantasy projections. Then I thought about the Morrison Technologies employees who'd lost their jobs because their executives had trusted Meridian's analysis. About the Clearwater Properties investors who'd lost millions on a Dallas expansion that never should have happened. About future clients who deserved accurate information instead of profitable lies. By 10 p.m., I'd filled 3 pages with notes and made my decision. But I wasn't going to be stupid about it. If I was going to challenge a company with legal resources and a reputation to protect, I needed to be smart, methodical, and thoroughly prepared. Step 1. Documentation. Over the next 2 days, I used my access to company files to gather every piece of evidence I could find. Email exchanges between Donovan and other analysts, discussing optimistic projections, memos about evolving client expectations, draft reports showing original numbers alongside final versions that had been inflated to meet client demands. I was careful. No obvious downloading of files, no suspicious printing activity, just a senior analyst doing his job, reviewing historical projects to identify best practices. Perfectly normal behavior that happened to involve photographing key documents with my personal phone. Step 2. External validation. I called Patricia Vance again, this time asking if she'd be willing to document her experiences at Meridian. She was hesitant at first. Nobody wants to burn bridges in a small industry, but when I explained the scope of what I'd discovered, she agreed to help. 2 other former colleagues were also willing to provide statements about pressure they'd received to modify their analyses. None of them wanted to go public, but all of them were willing to confirm their experiences if contacted by appropriate authorities. Step 3. Legal research. I spent Wednesday evening at the library, researching whistleblower protections, securities regulations, and professional standards for business consultants. What I learned was encouraging. Consultants who provide materially false information to clients can face both civil and criminal liability, and employees who report such practices are protected under federal law. Step 4. The right audience. This wasn't a situation for internal company complaints or industry gossip. Multiple clients had suffered significant financial losses based on fraudulent projections. This was a matter for regulatory authorities. Thursday morning, I drafted 2 letters. The first went to the Texas State Securities Board, outlining the pattern of false projections and providing specific examples of client harm. I included copies of the inflated reports, documentation of the pressure to falsify numbers, and contact information for former employees who could corroborate my account. The second letter went to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Similar content, but focused on the potential federal securities implications of providing false information to publicly traded companies. I didn't send them immediately. First, I wanted to give Meridian one final opportunity to address the situation internally. Friday morning, I walked into Donovan's office with my unsigned performance improvement plan. "I've made my decision," I said, placing the document on his desk. "Good. I was hoping you'd see reason." "I'm not signing it." His expression hardened. "Then you're terminating your employment." "No, I'm giving you an opportunity to fix this before it becomes a much bigger problem." I placed copies of my documentation on his desk. The Morrison Technologies losses, the Clearwater Properties failures, the pattern of inflated projections across multiple clients. This is what happens when consulting firms prioritize client satisfaction over analytical accuracy, I said. Real companies lose real money based on false information. He stared at the documents without touching them. "You have 48 hours to decide how Meridian wants to handle this situation. You can voluntarily review your practices, implement proper analytical standards, and contact affected clients to provide corrected projections. Or you can wait for regulatory authorities to make those decisions for you. Are you threatening me? I'm informing you." Monday morning, either Meridian announces internal reforms to ensure analytical integrity, or external authorities begin investigating why your clients are losing money based on fraudulent projections. I stood up to leave, then turned back. "Donovan, this isn't personal. This is about professional responsibility. You still have time to do the right thing." I walked back to my cubicle, gathered my personal items, and left Meridian Analytics for the last time. Monday morning, I mailed both letters. The response came faster than I expected. Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 week after I'd mailed my letters to the regulatory authorities, 2 investigators from the Texas State Securities Board appeared at Meridian Analytics offices. I wasn't there to see it personally. I was at home, updating my resume and wondering if I'd just committed career suicide. But Patricia Vance called me within hours with details she'd gotten from former colleagues who were still at the company. They showed up with boxes, she said, excitement clear in her voice. Official badges, subpoenas, the whole 9 yards. Walked straight to Donovan's office and asked for all client files from the past 2 years. How long were they there? 4 hours. They interviewed 6 different employees, including Cassandra Williams and 2 of the junior analysts. Apparently, they had very specific questions about modified projections and pressure to inflate growth estimates. I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that someone with authority was finally investigating. Apprehension about what this meant for everyone involved, including me. Any word on how management is handling it? Donovan's been in his office all day with the door closed. Yolanda from HR has been making calls to what sounds like lawyers. And here's the interesting part. They've suspended all new client projections pending internal review of analytical procedures. That was significant. Meridian's bread and butter was generating regular projections for ongoing clients. Suspending that work meant they were taking the investigation seriously, or their lawyers had advised them to stop potentially fraudulent activities immediately. Wednesday brought more developments. The SEC investigators arrived 2 agents from the Dallas regional office who spent the entire day reviewing files and conducting interviews. This time, they specifically requested to speak with former employees, including Patricia and the other colleagues who'd agreed to provide statements. Thursday morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. Professional voice. Mr. Fitzgerald? This is Agent Sarah Chen from the SEC. We'd like to schedule an interview regarding your complaint about Meridian Analytics. We met that afternoon at a federal building in downtown Austin. Agent Chen was joined by Agent Rodriguez and a court reporter. They were thorough, professional, and remarkably well-informed about the details I'd provided in my written complaint. Walk us through the Pinnacle Industries situation, Agent Chen began. I explained the timeline, the initial meeting with Donovan, his request to project 18% growth despite data supporting only 6%, my refusal, the subsequent demotion and performance improvement plan. Do you have documentation of these conversations? Some emails, the performance improvement plan, and photographs of the original analytical documents before they were modified. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. You said before they were modified. Are you saying the projections were changed after your departure? I don't know for certain, but given the pattern with other clients, I'd be surprised if they weren't. They asked about Morrison Technologies, Clearwater Properties, and the other clients I'd identified as having suffered losses based on inflated projections. They asked about conversations with Patricia Vance and other former employees. They asked about the company's financial structure, client relationships, and management practices. The interview lasted 3 hours. When it ended, Agent Chen shook my hand. Mr. Fitzgerald, I want you to know that your complaint has been extremely helpful. We'll be in touch as the investigation proceeds. Friday brought the news I'd been both expecting and dreading. Patricia called me at 6 p.m., her voice tense. It's over, Nolan. Meridian just announced they're suspending operations pending resolution of the regulatory investigation. Suspended operations? What about current clients? All projects are on hold. Most employees have been placed on administrative leave. Donovan's been terminated, along with 2 other department heads. I felt no satisfaction in hearing about Donovan's termination. Whatever mistakes he'd made, he had a family, responsibilities, a career that was now in ruins. But I also thought about the companies that wouldn't make disastrous decisions based on false projections, the employees who wouldn't lose jobs because their executives had been given unrealistic expectations. What about the clients who suffered losses? That's where it gets interesting. Morrison Technologies announced they're filing a civil lawsuit against Meridian for negligent misrepresentation. Clearwater Properties is reportedly considering similar action. And here's the part you'll find particularly relevant. Pinnacle Industries just issued a statement thanking regulatory authorities for preventing potentially costly business decisions based on inaccurate projections. Pinnacle Industries, the client whose false projections had started this entire mess. They'd never received Donovan's inflated 18% growth estimate because the investigation had shut down Meridian's operations before the final report could be delivered, which meant they'd avoided making expansion decisions that could have led to the same financial problems that had hurt Morrison Technologies and Clearwater Properties. Nolan? Patricia's voice brought me back to the conversation. Yeah, I'm here. You did the right thing. It took guts, and it probably cost you more than it should have, but you did the right thing. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a beer. watching the Austin sunset and thinking about consequences. Personal consequences, professional consequences, and the consequences of staying silent when you know something is wrong. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dad, saw the news about your old company. Are you okay?" I texted back, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Looking forward to seeing you this weekend." And for the first time in months, that was completely true. The full scope of Meridian Analytics problems became clear over the following weeks, unfolding like a financial thriller that I was simultaneously watching and living through. Monday morning, exactly 2 weeks after I'd sent my letters to the regulatory authorities, the local business journal ran a front-page story. Austin consulting firm under federal investigation for alleged client fraud. The article detailed the SEC investigation, the suspended operations, and the mounting civil lawsuits from affected clients. But the real vindication came Tuesday afternoon when Agent Chen called me with an update. "Mr. Fitzgerald, I wanted to inform you that we've completed our preliminary investigation. Based on the evidence you provided and our subsequent review, we're moving forward with formal charges against Meridian Analytics and several individual executives." "What kind of charges?" "Securities fraud, wire fraud, and violation of investment advisor regulations. The company will face substantial fines and permanent suspension of their business license. Individual executives will face both civil and criminal penalties." She paused. "I also wanted to let you know that you'll be eligible for a substantial whistleblower reward under the SEC's program. The exact amount won't be determined until all legal proceedings are complete, but given the scope of client losses we've documented, it should be significant." Significant turned out to be an understatement. 6 months later, I received a check for $847 Zerami share of the penalties collected from Meridian Analytics under the federal whistleblower program. But the financial reward wasn't the most satisfying part of the resolution. That came in the form of phone calls and emails from former clients who'd been saved from making costly mistakes. Morrison Technologies' CEO called personally to thank me for preventing them from making additional expansion decisions that would have worsened their financial situation. Clearwater Properties' president sent a letter explaining how the investigation had helped them identify problems with other consulting relationships. Most meaningfully, I heard from Pinnacle Industries' CFO. They'd hired a new consulting firm with a reputation for conservative, accurate analysis, and had made modest but profitable expansion decisions based on realistic 6% growth projections. "Your actions prevented us from overextending ourselves based on fantasy numbers," she wrote. "Our shareholders owe you a debt of gratitude." The professional vindication was equally important. Within 3 months of Meridian's collapse, I received job offers from 4 different consulting firms, all of whom explicitly cited my commitment to analytical integrity as a primary qualification. The story had spread through the industry, and rather than making me unemployable, my decision to blow the whistle had enhanced my professional reputation. I accepted a position as Senior Director of Financial Analysis at Hartwell Associates, a Dallas-based firm with a 40-year track record of conservative, accurate reporting. My starting salary was 20% higher than what I'd been making at Meridian before the demotion. Donovan Kraus faced the harshest individual penalties. Federal prosecutors charged him with securities fraud and wire fraud. He eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges and received 2 years in federal prison, plus 5 years of probation and a lifetime ban from working in the securities industry. The other executives involved in the scheme received varying penalties, fines, probation, industry bans. Yolanda Martinez, the HR director, avoided criminal charges but faced a substantial civil penalty and agreed to cooperate with ongoing investigations of similar practices at other firms. But perhaps the most important outcome was systemic. The Texas State Securities Board used the Meridian case to establish new regulations for consulting firms providing financial projections to business clients. The Meridian rules, as they became known in the industry, require documented methodologies, independent review of projections, and clear disclosure of assumptions and limitations. A year later, I was invited to speak at a conference on business ethics, sharing the podium with other whistleblowers who'd exposed corporate wrongdoing. The audience was mostly young professionals, analysts, consultants, accountants, people facing the same kinds of pressures I'd encountered at Meridian. "The hardest part," I told them, "isn't making the decision to do the right thing. It's living with the uncertainty while you wait to see if doing the right thing was worth the cost." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "What if you can't afford to lose your job? What if you have kids, a mortgage, responsibilities?" "I had all those things," I replied. A mortgage, 2 kids in school, health insurance needs, retirement savings to worry about. But I also realized that keeping a job by compromising your professional integrity isn't really keeping a job, it's just postponing the inevitable consequences while making them worse. How do you know if you're making the right choice? I thought about Morrison Technologies' laid-off employees, about Clearwater Properties' foreclosed real estate, about Pinnacle Industries' narrow escape from financial disaster. Ask yourself this: if your work causes harm to people who trusted you to be competent and honest, can you live with that? And if you stay silent about practices that harm innocent people, are you really protecting your family? Or are you teaching them that integrity is negotiable when the price is right? The applause was warm and sustained. Afterward, several audience members approached me with their own stories of workplace ethical dilemmas. Some had already made the decision to speak up. Others were still struggling with the choice. I gave them all the same advice. Document everything. Seek legal counsel. Remember that short-term pain often prevents long-term disaster. And never forget that your professional integrity is the one thing nobody can take away from you unless you give it to them. That evening, driving back to Austin, I called Emma and Jake to check in. Both were doing well in school. Both were proud of their father for doing the right thing even when it was hard, as Jake put it. Emma, now a freshman at UT studying business, had a different perspective. Dad, we talked about your case in my business ethics class. My professor said it's a perfect example of how individual integrity can prevent systemic harm. What do you think? I think I'm lucky to have a father who taught me that some things are more important than job security. As I hung up the phone, I realized that might be the most valuable legacy of the entire experience, the financial reward or professional recognition. But the knowledge that my children had learned integrity isn't just a concept you discuss in ethics classes. It's a choice you make when the cost of doing the right thing seems higher than you can afford to pay. 2 years later, I was sitting in my new office at Hartwell Associates, reviewing a market analysis for a client in the renewable energy sector. The numbers were solid but not spectacular, realistic projections based on careful analysis of market conditions, regulatory trends, and competitive factors. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice was familiar. Mr. Fitzgerald, this is Jessica Morrison from Morrison Technologies. I don't know if you remember me, but you probably saved my job. I remembered. Morrison Technologies had been one of the companies that suffered significant losses based on Meridian's inflated projections. They'd laid off 150 employees before the situation stabilized. Of course I remember. How are things going? That's why I'm calling. We hired a new consulting firm, actually. It was Hartwell Associates. Your new company and their conservative projections helped us make much smarter expansion decisions. We've been growing steadily for 18 months, and we just rehired most of the people we had to let go. She paused. I wanted you to know that doing the right thing didn't just prevent future problems. It actually helped fix past ones. After hanging up, I walked to the window and looked out at the Dallas skyline. 2 years ago, I'd been sitting in cubicle 47 at Meridian Analytics, wondering if I'd destroyed my career by refusing to falsify a client report. Today, I was leading a team of analysts at a firm known throughout the industry for integrity and accuracy. The lesson wasn't just about whistleblowing or corporate ethics. It was about something more fundamental, the long-term value of short-term courage. Every profession faces moments when doing the right thing conflicts with doing the profitable thing, the convenient thing, or the politically safe thing. Doctors who refuse to prescribe unnecessary treatments, lawyers who won't file frivolous lawsuits, engineers who insist on safety standards that add cost and complexity, teachers who won't inflate grades to improve their school's statistics. The pressure to compromise comes in different forms, but the choice is always the same. Maintain your professional standards or abandon them for immediate advantage. What I learned from the Meridian experience is that integrity isn't just about personal character, it's about professional competence. When you falsify data, inflate projections, or misrepresent facts, you're not just being dishonest. You're being incompetent, because competence means providing accurate information that helps people make good decisions. The clients who lost money based on Meridian's false projections weren't just victims of fraud. They were victims of professional incompetence disguised as customer service. That's why the consequences were so severe and so swift. When professional competence breaks down systematically, entire industries can suffer. Clients lose trust. Regulatory authorities intervene. and honest practitioners get tainted by association with dishonest ones. But the reverse is also true. When individuals maintain high standards despite pressure to compromise, they strengthen the entire profession. Every analyst who insists on accurate data, every consultant who provides realistic projections, every professional who prioritizes competence over convenience makes it easier for colleagues to do the same. The morning I refused to falsify the Pinnacle Industries projections, I thought I was just making a personal decision about my own professional standards. I didn't realize I was participating in a much larger process, the ongoing challenge of maintaining professional integrity in competitive environments. 6 months after starting at Hartwell Associates, I was promoted to regional director with responsibility for establishing analytical standards across all our southwestern offices. Part of my job involves training new analysts, and I always begin with the same message. Your technical skills will determine how well you do your job. Your integrity will determine whether you deserve to have the job in the first place. I tell them about Meridian Analytics, about the pressure to compromise, about the choice between short-term security and long-term integrity. I explain that every profession depends on public trust, and that trust is earned by individuals who choose competence over convenience, even when convenience would be more profitable. Most importantly, I tell them that integrity isn't a luxury you can afford only when times are good. It's a necessity you need most when times are bad. Last month, one of my junior analysts came to me with a familiar problem. A client was pressuring him to modify growth projections to support a merger they wanted to pursue. The actual data suggested the merger would be financially problematic, but the client's executives had already made up their minds. "What should I do?" he asked. I smiled. "What do you think you should do? Stick to the data even if it costs us the client. And if they take their business elsewhere, then they'll take their business to a firm that tells them what they want to hear instead of what they need to know. Eventually, that's going to cause them problems." "And what about our firm?" He thought for a moment. "We'll keep the clients who want accurate analysis, and we'll avoid the reputation problems that come from being associated with bad business decisions." "Exactly. Any other questions?" "Just one. Does it ever get easier?" I thought about that Tuesday morning at Meridian Analytics, about the moment when Donovan slid the Pinnacle Industries folder across his desk and asked me to make impossible numbers look reasonable. "No," I said. "It doesn't get easier, but it does get clearer." The most important lesson I learned from the entire experience was this: integrity isn't a single decision you make once and then forget about. It's a daily choice to prioritize long-term consequences over short-term pressures. Every time you choose accuracy over convenience, competence over profit, truth over popularity, you're making a small investment in a reputation that will define your entire career. And every time you make the opposite choice, you're borrowing against a future that eventually comes due. The bill always comes due. That's why my advice to anyone facing similar pressure is simple. Don't think about what you can afford to lose by doing the right thing. Think about what you can't afford to lose by doing the wrong thing. Your reputation, your self-respect, your ability to sleep at night knowing that your work helps people instead of hurting them. Those things, once lost, are very hard to get back. But integrity, once maintained, becomes the foundation for everything else you build in your professional life. 2 weeks after I refused to falsify those reports, Meridian Analytics collapsed. But my career, the real career built on competence and integrity, was just beginning. If this story resonated with you and you believe in the power of doing what's right even when it's difficult, please consider subscribing to our channel for more inspiring stories about courage, integrity, and standing up for your values in the workplace. Your support helps us continue sharing these important messages.